Welcome to the week ahead reading for August 3rd through 9th. Today we're going to be using cards from the Moonchild Tarot Deck. The first visual that came in was a sparkling, shimmery, like glitter, metallic surface. It looked like water, but it was fully glitter. And it had a bit of a pink undertone. So I was seeing as if a hand was reaching towards it, like running their fingertips across the surface. So there was ripples and the movement of light across the surface. And I was asking, is this an illusion? And I got, yes, this is an illusion. And that brings us right away to our first card, which is the Chariot. I am recording on a really, really rainy day. And so I've made my lights pretty bright so that it doesn't look like I'm totally sitting in the dark. But as you'll see, if I hold the card up, normally it's not going to come out super incredibly. So I will at different points hold the card back so that you can see a little bit more of the color palette so it's not so washed out. So we have this woman who is standing on the chariot and she has a cloak behind her of the cosmos. And really what this is typically signaling is some sort of a victory in the realm of intuition. So I had another quote come through, really a question. Are we driven by our notions of success, or are we exploring the depths of what really makes us happy and fulfilled? The start of this week is representing a sacred pause to reflect on that victory and prepare. The visual I then saw was a hand being placed over someone's chest, like they're closing their eyes or like really, really going inward. What somebody might do in a meditation to energetically center. And then another line came through, we are more than our makeup. So that one felt like I kind of wanted to ask for additional interpretation, but I got the guidance to just leave that as is and allow people to take that language as they will this week. And that brings us to card number 2, which is the Six of Swords. So again, there's a woman who is holding one blade up and then she has several pointed towards her. And it's a little bit hard to see, but the sixth sword is actually within her black dress, embedded. And this came through as encapsulating really the bulk of the week, like a solid 5 days. So in essence, that leaves us with one day at the beginning. So this is like Monday going into Tuesday, transitional period of time, 5 days. And then we have our last card, which picks up the rest. The quote that came through here was finding truth in the darkness. And then I was guided to open up the guidebook and the information that I gleaned from the one small passage that I read was that we are sourcing our personal power from the cosmos. Again, interesting as a parallel, like she had the cosmos here. And then we are sourcing, we are wielding in order to connect with our inner strength. These first two cards have really spoken to our abilities, so being able to like show them off. So here they're kind of put on display, and then further we're even more, not aggressively, but intentionally wielding them and for the greater good. It's for the purposes of growth and progress. So depending on where you're at, this could mean for the collective, if that's your cup of tea, but it doesn't necessarily need to mean bigger picture progress. It could just be your personal growth and your progression as an individual. Before we get into the third card, I had a big long quote come in, so I will read the channeling I had for that. We know where our limits are and what should stay outside of our sphere for now, because we really don't have influence over those domains anyway, just the longing for things to be different. All right, so that brings us to card number 3, which then was a nice setup. We had the Lovers. This is the final and how it felt transitional energy to set us up for next week. And big picture, this card represents balance of the divine, feminine, and masculine. People tend to look at this card and assume that, oh, it's lovers. It means it's about a relationship. I was getting explicitly here, because sometimes it can, that it is not about partnership. That is not what we're talking about this week. That is not what we're talking about with this card. If there's love here, it's about finding love within the parts of yourself. Again, that's what we're doing. We're thinking about what our specific ability is here. We're wielding that ability. And then we are looking at all of those other parts that we haven't been wielding, we haven't been viewing as sources of empowerment and strength and skill, and giving a little bit of love to those, or maybe even integrating. But ultimately, it's trying to find a balance between those highs and the lows. And I had these dualities come in that I wanted to share as well. So it could be striking a balance between intensity and calm, productivity and creation, and doing versus being. And here I was drawn to read a pretty extensive passage from the actual guidebook. And the quote was, "How can you strengthen your own relationship with yourself before building a strong connection with another? Remember to mutually honor and celebrate your own dreams and stories. Your combined choices will always stand true when your foundation is equally imbued with self-love and support." So that is completely spot on with everything that I was just describing that had come through when I was channeling. So we're finding the balance, and this could just mean some sort of a self-love practice, but it's very targeted, it's specific, because we are empowered in other ways this week. So this is closing the gap. It's filling in those other areas. It's shining light on those maybe neglected corners, or recognizing, as I gave with those polarities before, where are we out of balance that we know is not working? And how can we make those small adjustments while still celebrating ourselves? This is a positive. It's not, I'm trying to snuff out what's not working. I'm just being open, kind, compassionate, willing to see the truth. I'm just remembering, like, the first thing that came in was remember what's true. That was what came in before the first card. So that is part of the narrative for us this week. The general sentiment is that we are staying open. We are centering our energy at the start in a sacred pause and going inward. We're then spending most of the week sharing and connecting to truth, even when in the darkness. We're clinging to that light and sense of authenticity before closing out in a slight turn, which guides us into next week and our next chapter, by returning to center in a bookend. But this time it's about true balance rather than personal power. And we're recalibrating with compassion to celebrate both the light and the dark within us, the high and the low vibration, the truth in the shadows, the secrets in the light, etc., and how we are living, or how we could live, in a balanced way that nurtures all parts of our soul essence. For my analysis, number one thing that jumped out to me right away, which again is going to be a little bit hard in this lighting, but the incredibly similar color palettes across these cards. So we have a lot of these like light pinks, and one section that's dark, like there's just this like almost shadow. There's like these people, this person, the cloak behind her or cape behind her. But we have these like light pinks, light blues. This one is the only one that doesn't have gold, but the other two have some big gold marker as well. So lots of similarities. And again, if you've seen me using this deck before, it's not like, oh, all the cards look like that. They don't all look like this, but it happened to be a selection that looks pretty harmonious. Also, to talk about the types of cards, we have in our bookend, how nice, we have two major arcana cards. So these are like themes, categories, huge markers, and then one card in the minor arcana. I wanted to look up the elements, so that's something I usually talk about. And it's easier to do that when you have the swords. You say, oh, well, swords is air. Great. But then what does that mean for the two major arcana cards? So I did look these up because there are equivalences. And the chariot comes up always as being Cancer. So that's water. And I saw for the most part that the lovers was Gemini. There's some instances where people said, oh, lovers, it's got to be Libra or like something else. But regardless, it means it would be air. So in essence, we have one water and then two air. And that makes sense because we are doing a combination of thinking and feeling in a very, very blended way throughout this entire week. And it is important to clarify that this week is not explicitly about communication. Nowhere in here was like, even in the wielding our truth, it didn't mean that we had to go talk to someone and we had to write or share or preach about anything in particular. It's just that we are wielding our truth. That could be in things that we say, but wielding can also be an action to a degree. So it's more of like standing in our truth, being in our truth, thinking, remembering what's true. So it's the clarity of mind versus necessarily needing to communicate it so explicitly to other people through, as I mentioned, preaching or teaching. It's really more so about knowing where we stand. So we're understanding, we're celebrating. Oh, I just realized, wait, we're doing that in both. Another bookend. So this is a victory. So we're celebrating our intuition. We're standing in our truth. We're wielding that truth. And then we have the recalibration, but we are celebrating ourselves also along the way here. Now to get into the astrology. Number one caveat I have to mention that during this week, we are entering the eclipse portal. So the first eclipse of the season doesn't start until next week, but around a week before is usually when I will mention that we're in the approach. The energetic buildup is happening. People might start feeling the eclipse energy, even though we are several days out. So I would say around the 5th is the point that we might start noticing a bit of a switch or transition, which is going to take us a few days into this week here. Now, talking about the present day astrology for this week, we come in on Monday with an Aries moon, and so already in that sign. And then around 4 p.m. Eastern time that day, we have Chiron stationing retrograde in Taurus. So this is beginning the progression back, the lessons learned. We were mentioning here that we're reflecting. So it's the beginning process of starting to reflect over the next many weeks, because then in early September, that is when we have Chiron re-entering Aries. We're putting the final notes, revisions, changes, healing applied to that area of life where it spent 8 years, and then it will re-enter Taurus in April. So quite some time from now. So I do think this makes sense. Again, it's celebrating, but it is looking to rely on maybe whatever healing modalities we're working. We're grounding, we're centering. I mentioned earlier, we're reconnecting to ourselves. So I do think that this particular signature makes sense as well. And then on Tuesday, to double down on the Taurus energy, we have the moon going into Taurus. This is around 11 p.m. Eastern time, so right at the end of the day. So you want to check your time zone. It could very well be on Wednesday for you. And otherwise, in my time, no new news on Wednesday. But on Thursday, we have Venus entering Libra. Yay. And this is around 3 p.m. Eastern time. And then right before midnight on Thursday, so again, check your time zone here, we have Mercury exiting its retrograde post shadow. So it means it's finally wrapped up. All of that muddled energy is cleared. So that is another important day to make note of. And I have talked about this in my astro weather report. So you can check those out. I spoke about the ingress, the Chiron retrograde situation, as well as the Mercury retrograde officially closing out. So if you want to learn about those signatures, definitely check those out in those videos. And Friday, we have, kind of fittingly, given that we're talking about the air sign energy here, the moon going into Gemini around 2 a.m. So same thing that Thursday into Friday. You want to check your time zone because the 3 p.m. just before midnight and then 2 a.m., those could shift those timelines very much for you depending on where you're living. Nothing new on Saturday, but then Sunday we have the moon going into Cancer around 4 a.m. Eastern time, and then Mercury entering Leo around 12:30 p.m. So that is another notable transition that's going into fire, which we, other than, I guess it's kind of interesting. We do have a bookend there that's in fire, where we had the Aries moon on Monday, and then we had Mercury and Leo on Sunday. So there's this feeling of a bookend because the whole rest of the week we don't have, obviously we have planets that are in fire signs, but as far as new and changing astrology, there is a lack of emphasis on fire. And that was one of the two elements in this sequence that we didn't have. The focus here, again, reminder, was water and air. And Yeah, so we had earth energy in some of the events happening, air energy as well. And then we have that kind of nice symbolic bookend of a little fire going on, which is kind of cool. Given that we're only a few days into August, it's a really great opportunity if you haven't, or it's been a while, and you want to go back and listen to the July astro weather reports or the psychic forecast while it's still fresh in your mind what your experience was over the last several weeks. You can check in, reflect, really integrate. And then you can also see the August versions as well. So at this point, I'm guessing I'll have released most of, if not all, of my astro weather reports for this month. So you can check those out on my YouTube channel. I'll also embed them in my blog post where I do more of a deep dive into some of the transits happening this month. On the psychic forecast side, that came out on Saturday. You can listen to that, read the transcript, check in on it all throughout the month. And then, of course, just blending that with what we're talking about each week in these week ahead forecasts. During this week, I'm going to have my Void Moons class. So if you are interested to learn about Void of Course moons, I'm doing a 101 at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time on August 5th. It's been a while since I've done just a straight astrology lecture, so I had cast this one out to do a while ago. And part of it is because I've decided to include void moons in my 2027 life path calendar. So I have already done some research and prep on this, but I wanted to do a little bit more of a deep dive to explain this concept, this timing technique, and how you can use it. And then just outside of this week, so on the Monday, so first day of next week, at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, I have my monthly meditation and journal prompt class. So that is brand new, totally unique every single month. I channel the meditation practice and style, as well as all of the journal prompts with it. It's maximum an hour, usually less than that, but a nice container to reset. And I don't record those. So it's a you have to be there if you want to experience it type of situation. So I hope you'll join and attend.